Namaskar and a very warm welcome to all the special guests present today. My name is Ruchika Anand and I welcome you all on behalf of Participation in School Education SEG of Unnat Bharat Abhiyan, IIT Delhi, Ministry of Education to the inaugural ceremony and the first webinar of our Naya Bharat e-series. Before we start, we have few housekeeping rules that need to be followed. Participants joining us on the WebEx should not unmute their mic until and unless asked for. For the participants who are joining us through YouTube, you can ask questions from the speakers by posting your questions on the YouTube chat box along with your names. To begin our session, let me introduce you to Professor Nomesh Bolia. Professor Nomesh Bolia is a professor in the Department of Mechanical Engineering at IIT Delhi. With a BTech from IIT Bombay and PhD in Operations Research from UNC Chapel Hill in the US, his research and innovation interests are in operations research and its application to public systems, policy, and governance, especially in areas such as school education. He is the national coordinator of the Unnat Bharat Abhiyan's subject expert group on participation in schools. Professor Bolia is the recipient of several national international awards and grants such as Indo-US Science and Technology Forum's Public Health Fellowship and DAD Research Stays. He has published several papers in international journals of repute, consulted many companies in the public-private sector in India, and mentored startups in the broad domain of operations research. His vision and commitment to the area of industrial engineering and operations research have been recognized by the Government of India by nominating him as a member of the Board of Governors of the National Institute of Industrial Engineering, India's premier institute in this area. Professor Nomesh is also the national coordinator of the ASEAN PhD Fellowship Program of the Government of India, which aims to harness the potential of India-ASEAN cooperation through education and research. I now request Professor Bolia to kindly introduce us to the Naya Bharat e-series and take us further towards the inaugural ceremony.
Okay, namaste everyone, and a very warm welcome to all of you to the inaugural of the Naya Bharat e-series. This warmth is both from my heart as well as I hope from the sun, which is gracing us very well today, even in a city which is known for cold such as Delhi. The story of Naya Bharat e-series goes back almost about 6 years. That's where the origins lie. In 2014, the government of India, as a result of hard work of two of our senior colleagues and our then director, along with several other colleagues, started what is called the Unnat Bharat Abhiyan. The idea behind Unnat Bharat Abhiyan is simple yet brilliant. We have a lot of higher education institutes in the country which have a lot of energy as well as a lot of ideas. And of course, there are the rural parts of our country, even other parts of our country, which can very well harness that energy and the expertise that resides in such institutes. So the idea of Unnat Bharat Abhiyan is to connect, converge these higher education institutes with development of the country, and hence the name Unnat Bharat Abhiyan. IIT Delhi is the national coordinating institute rather of the Unnat Bharat Abhiyan, and Professor V.K. Vijay is the national coordinator. As a part of Unnat Bharat Abhiyan, about more than 2,500 what are called participating institutes. These are higher education institutes all over the country, including the ones such as IITs, ISERs. They have been associated with Unnat Bharat Abhiyan. They have adopted at least 5 villages in their cluster near their location. And they are doing several activities in the area of school education, in the area of energy, waste management, and so on. So it is this strength of the higher education institutes and the 2,500 plus participating institutes all over the country that Unnat Bharat Abhiyan brings for an Unnat Bharat. Now, to support Unnat Bharat Abhiyan in these expert areas, in the specific areas such as education and energy, waste management, the kind that I talked about, Unnat Bharat Abhiyan has set up what is called the subject expert groups. Out of several such subject expert groups, there is one on participation in school education, and I've been given the responsibility to coordinate that group. Now, while we were working on developing ideas for the subject expert group to develop resources that our participating institutes all over the country can use, the National Education Policy 2020 was announced. It's a brilliant policy, many good path-breaking, game-changing ideas, look very, very good on paper, and in fact, probably the first time people have started talking about such things in our country. However, the big question that always lingers is how do these wonderful ideas get implemented? Right? How do the schools and the other stakeholders, including the young people who are so beautifully involved in education, how do they get confident that this can all be done? It asks for a lot of things to be implemented as a part of the education process. So how does it get done? How do they get confident by doing all of this? They will compromise neither on quality nor on their intake of what kind of students get into their schools or on the output. Now, I have been lucky to have an alma mater such as IIT Bombay. It gave me amazing opportunities starting in my student days itself to travel literally all over the country. I've traveled, in the most heartlands to the metros of the country. Of course, I also got a chance to go abroad, do my PhD. But what I realized is there are gems, what I call gems, all over the country, doing wonderful work in school education. Many of which are very closely aligned to the ideas present in the new education policy. These gems and these ideas are very rooted and real. From Nagar Karnool, which is one of the things I will talk about towards the end of this webinar, to Nai Delhi, which is again something that you will see today. From Maharashtra to MP, from Chennai to Cherrapunji, there is a whole bunch of people who are engaged in very, very good work. I myself have benefited from such work. I know several others who have been benefiting from such work. The question going on in our mind was, why not mine all of these gems, so to speak, right? Why not get all of them to come and speak about what their experiences on the ground have been? To not just talk about why and what should be done in alignment with the new education policy and beyond, but also how to do it. So thus was formed the Naya Bharat e-series. It literally encourages us to go towards a new India, which really takes us the way the new education policy wants us to. It is thus an annual thought, an inspiration, and action extravaganza with one webinar almost every month. The aim is to focus on making education meaningful and empowering for our citizens. Each such webinar, each such session will focus on a very specific aspect of education delivery, particularly in the light of NEP, the New Education Policy 2020. And it will essentially be divided into two parts. The first part will focus on the principles of the aspect that we are discussing in a given webinar, and the second part on its implementation, which is where we have tried to literally mine all these gems from all over the country. It is our privilege and honor that Sadhguru has agreed to give us time for the inaugural ceremony. To inaugurate this extraordinary series, it's my pleasure to bring before you a conversation between Sadhguru and my good friend Sanjeev Sanyal on the future and present of education in India. Although Sadhguru doesn't really need any introduction, we begin with a few lines to re-emphasize why he matters to all of us. Sadhguru is a yogi, mystic, and a visionary of our times. He's been conferred the Padma Vibhushan, India's highest annual civilian award, accorded for exceptional and distinguished service. Speaker and opinion maker of international renown, he has spoken at various forums across the world. Sadhguru has spoken passionately about the need for a revolution in our clothing culture and fashion with sustainability at its core. Save the Weave is an initiative launched by Sadhguru to bring about global awareness on this issue. 3 decades ago, Sadhguru founded Isha Foundation, a non-profit human service organization with human well-being as its core commitment. The foundation has over 11 million volunteers in more than 300 centers worldwide. In conversation with Sadhguru, we have Shri Sanjeev Sanyal, who's currently the principal economic advisor to the Government of India. He also represents India on a number of international forums. As the co-chair of the G20 Framework Working Group, he's been one of the main architects of the G20's Global Action Plan used to coordinate the global response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Prior to joining the government in February 2017, he spent over 2 decades in the financial sector and was global strategist and managing director at Deutsche Bank. He was named Young Global Leader by the World Economic Forum in 2010. Shri Sanyal is also a well-known urban theorist and writer, and that is where my connection with Sanjeev comes in. In 2007, he was awarded the Eisenhower Fellowship for his work on urban dynamics. He's been a visiting scholar at Oxford University, an adjunct fellow at the Institute of Policy Studies Singapore, a senior fellow of the Worldwide Fund for Nature, a fellow of the Royal Geographical Society London, and an honorary professor of Jawaharlal Nehru University. In 2015-16, he served in the Future Cities Subcommittee of the Singapore government, tasked with building a long-term vision for the city-state. Shri Sanyal is our homegrown Delhiite. He attended the Shri Ram College of Commerce, Delhi, and Oxford University, where he was a Rhodes Scholar. His best-selling books include The Land of Seven Rivers, The Indian Renaissance, India in the Age of Ideas, and The Ocean of Churn, which is one of my favorites, all published by Penguin. In addition, he has published about 200 articles, columns, and reports in leading national and international publications. I really hope you will enjoy this unmitigated, pure joy of the conversation for the next 50 odd minutes. Over to you, Sanjeev, and look forward.
Thank you, Professor Bolia, for inviting both myself and Sadhguruji for this event. Obviously, education is something very close to both our hearts, and now that we have the new education policy and we have the Unnat Bharat Abhiyan, obviously this is something where we need a national conversation, and who better to start this whole sequence than with, of course, Sadhguru, who has always very interesting views about all of this. So welcome, Sadhguru, to this conversation. And again, thank you to Professor Bolia and to IIT Delhi for giving us this opportunity. So let me begin with what is obviously a very topical thing right now. We are having this conversation in the middle of a pandemic, which has shut down the world effectively. And while it's going to disrupt a lot of things, the one thing it is clearly going to disrupt is education. For the last 6 months, around the world, education, whether it's primary or secondary or higher education, a lot of it has happened in the format we are using, which is online. And I can't believe that we will be all returning back to our classes in the same way. Now, this doesn't mean that human interaction is not needed. Peer learning is clearly important. We clearly need, to have something more than just an online system. But I can't see how this experience is not changing things fundamentally. For example, why do you need every classroom to have a teacher doing a lecture? Why not just record the very best lecture in the world and put it online? Everybody can listen to it. And then the only reason you go to school is to do projects, meet your friends, maybe clear up doubts and so on. So, I mean, and by the way, this could be true for every level of education. So I know, Sadhguru, you have strong views on this, so over to you.
Well, I must tell you, this is not a new idea for me. Right from the first day I was put in school, I always wondered why they're talking the same thing all over the place. So I must tell you this, when I was in graduation, I also went to the university, okay, I don't look like that, but I went there. And in those times, the teachers came in and they had some old notes and they would start reading and everybody starts writing. I just looked at this, I have 1,000 questions in my head. For me, questions followed me like a cloud around me always. I was full of questions. Nobody there to answer these questions, but they have notes which they're reading and everybody else is writing down. So I said, see, why don't you give us that notes, we'll photocopy it. Then you don't have to come to the college and we don't have to come to the college, we can use our time in some other way. And so when I said this, like it was a problem, so they all agreed with me that they'll give me attendance and I don't have to come. So I made a deal and I stayed out of the classes most of the time through those 3 years of graduation. Why I'm saying this is, We're always looking at how not to repeat things, how not to waste human resource by doing the same thing over and over again. Our education system is a classic example of wastefulness of human resource and intelligence and not using human intelligence in any creative way. Above all, stymieing human genius because of repetitiveness and repetitiveness. If you do something very repetitive, anybody will move towards boredom and depression slowly over a period of time unless they create something exuberant in their life by themselves. Education system has become like this. Well, this was necessary at one time because that's all the means that they had. But today, once the technologies have come, unfortunately, technologies have always been there. I've been talking about this, going hoarse about this for the last 15 years, that you want to teach a physics class, why don't we learn from the greatest physicist in the world and it can be delivered everywhere? Only thing is, the teacher can be there and bring understanding, create projects and more practical ways of looking at things as you already mentioned in the question itself. So this system we have already been implementing in our Isha Home School and we are looking at how to identify, there is a certain genius in every child. Will we be able to identify and nurture that in the given situation, in the given time we have is the only question. Whether there is genius or not is not a question. The question is only will we have the breadth of arrangement to identify and nurture that. That is a questionable thing, unfortunately. So we are looking at how we have somebody very high-level math, mentor. So this person takes off about 12 students in the whole school, that their focus on education is 80% mathematics and 20% other subjects. We want to create other subjects like this also. Actually, I was thinking of setting up schools, just mathematics schools, physics schools, chemistry schools, because this is very needed for the country. Right now, our idea of science is information technology. If you say I'm in science, only thing is I can do programming, people are thinking this is science. Well, this is technology, it is useful, it is good for your livelihood and it does many things in the world, all that appreciated. But fundamental sciences have taken a hit in the country. If you go to many colleges have closed down their physics, chemistry, biology courses completely,
There is no
completely.
spirit of inquiry, it's only application.
Yes. So there is no learning, there's no process, it's only about livelihood, livelihood, livelihood. This comes from another time when India was in such a state of poverty where everybody was concerned about livelihood. I think after 70 years, all said and done, one way or the other, we have landed on our feet, maybe little still wobbly, but we are on our feet, we are not on our heads. So now is the time to really rethink education in a revolutionary manner. With the technologies available, it is very, very much possible right now. For this to happen, if we believe everything will happen by policy, this is a wrong approach. It must happen by enterprise. You must allow private people to do whatever. This is what I have been trying to tell the government also. See, when did the government assume that you care for the children more than the parents? There is no such thing. The parents have the maximum care for their children. So I am saying, suppose I start an institution and I will teach rubbish and I will charge a bomb, but the parents like it and the children like it. What is anybody's problem, I'm saying? Nobody should have a problem. Only then innovative education systems will come, only then we can really unpack human genius in our education system. Right now, in spite of the education system, some people unpack their genius. With the education system, I don't think anybody is unpacking their genius, they're just becoming like bureaucrats very early on. I'm not saying this with any negative connotation to the bureaucrat, I'm sorry, you are also one, I don't mean it that way. What I'm saying is, routine work it'll become. You're trying to fulfill education like routine work. Go to school, do this, pass the exam, go to school, do this, pass the exam. This is all it is. Education is not an exciting exploration. If that has to happen, it has to be done in innovative ways without too much policy restriction. It's the business of the school to see we can set up some kind of a standard, a common evaluation system where at the age of 10, every child should be at least this much competence. 15, they must be here, 18, they must be here. These kind of policies government can fix. Right now, the policies are such that they are fixing what kind of premises you should have. Our premises are made 5 to 10 times more than the prescription, but the fee is fixed by the government. What salaries you must pay for the teachers is fixed by the government. So if you just make simple arithmetic, I'm saying if you make simple arithmetic, if you pay that much salary, you cannot do the school at this fees. The only way you can do it is you have 100 children in one school, one class. Our schools are made like this, the maximum number is 22 in a classroom. At that number, with the kind of attention that we are giving to the children, it's simply impossible to run a school. So I'm saying simple arithmetic is not understood after all this policy making. So we are constantly looking at education policy like it's some government structured stuff. Yes, in the early part when nearly 85–90% were illiterate, maybe you did that in terms of literacy. But literacy is not what we need. What we need right now for India is quality education, and that cannot be delivered by the government systems. Government can do large-scale education as it's doing. Right now, nearly 52% of the children are going to government schools and 48% are going to the private schools. So these private schools, maybe right now they're running in such a way that you think their standards are not good, they're charging too much, whatever. But if you allow for the market to go in its own way, quality will live, that which doesn't have quality will die naturally. That's how every other industry, everything else functions. It's very important that enterprise should come into education systems. Right now, some 25 to $30 billion worth of education is going out of India. Whole lot of people who can… anybody who can afford sending their children out at the age of 16, 18, with lots of fear what will happen to the children in these countries. So why is it that we are not able to do that quality of education here in the country? Simply because you don't allow investments, you don't allow, proper running of a place is possible. Only when you want to get quality people, you have to pay accordingly and do such things. If you want to invest in technology, you need money to do that. So these things have not been considered, it's very important. We need to understand India is not one common segment of people. There are layers of people who can afford different levels of things. Just because the poorest class cannot afford something, you don't say that is the only level we will provide for everybody else. No, everybody is going abroad. They're sending their children abroad because they don't like the quality that you provide here. It's important we retain that education in India, because most of the institutions in America, the deans are all Indians. They would have been there if you had provided the opportunity.
In fact, Sadhguruji, you have just raised a very important issue, which will obviously… it's there in the new education policy, but it's also a matter of big debate all the time, which is the issue of language that is used at least for primary education. And the new education policy talks about teaching in the mother tongue, that it's easier for younger people to teach in their… to learn in their mother tongue, to explore in their mother tongue. Fair point. I don't want to go into the debate about whether English should also be taught at the same time. I think it should be from the early stage. But the question is, the general medium of education, there is a lot of research suggesting that if they do it in mother tongue, it is easier for the child to pick it up. Fair enough. It is also fair that this is good, of course, for preserving our cultural identities and so on. But it is also important that this is brings somewhat social linkages, because otherwise what's happening is that we are dividing up into an English-speaking elite and everybody else. So there's another reason to do this. However, there is a serious issue here in that while we want this education to do it done in mother tongue, the curriculums, the material that is taught is simply outdated. And while I can understand you do want to teach, they're just like nursery rhymes are timeless. There are, in every language, there are legends, stories, myths, which you do want to teach. But by and large, what happens is when I did my own survey in the languages I understand, Hindi and Bangla, I found that it's quite interesting. Most of the material in Indian languages is simply stuck in the 1930s or 40s. I mean, look at the technologies that are there in Hindi or Bangla textbooks, and I'm sure it's true of Tamil and Kannada and other languages. they're all in the steam engines. They're all, the latest technologies in this is steam engines. You don't even find televisions in there. Forget about mobile phones and laptops.
It's called romanticism.
Yes, and so what happens is, in an aspirational country, you begin to associate Indian languages with backwardness. And this is a serious issue, and I don't know what we can do about it, but I'm sure you've thought about this and think about it in your own schools.
See, a language, any language to develop, it takes probably a millennia or more to develop into a full-fledged language. Of the many things that human beings can do, language is one of the most complex things that we do in our neurological system. There are substantial studies to show those who speak 2, 3 languages, multiple languages in their life, definitely their brain works in a much better way than those who speak a single language in their life. This is clearly established. So having said that, when India has such an advantage that if you just travel across the border, in Delhi, if you just cross this way, you have to speak Punjabi, if you cross that way, you have to speak something else. When this is there, in Tamil Nadu we are there, if we just cross over 100 kilometers, if you travel, you have to speak Kannada. If you travel this way, just 10 kilometers from where we are is Kerala. If you travel that way within like 150 kilometers, it's Telugu speaking people. When it is like this, we have this advantage, very easily we can pick up the language. When we say in school teaching languages, unfortunately, we're always thinking of teaching alphabet and reading and writing. Well, I would say 2 languages let the child learn to read and write. One is definitely the mother tongue, which… See, first of all, our states were divided on linguistic basis because we wanted to preserve the priority of the local language. So, let the mother tongue always be primary for the child to start with, but English language should be there because English language is your passport to the world. Without English language, you will get crippled in so many different ways because almost everything is in English language today in the world, and internet is on English language largely. There may be other languages, but still the dominant force is English language. And today, India is moving towards a technological revolution of its own, in its own way, information technology. When this is the case, you cannot ignore English language, you cannot say that only after the child is 12, 15 years of age, I will teach them English language. They will always be handicapped because of that. But there must be a primary mother tongue a learning process for everybody. At least till they are 12, 15 years of age, they must learn. But additional languages can be introduced as speaking languages. Why should we be able to write and read everything? It is not necessary. At least speaking languages, you must develop another 3 languages you can learn as speaking languages, which will make the human being much more versatile and much more capable of traveling even out… See, many people who have studied in local languages in Tamil Nadu, Karnataka and Andhra Pradesh, they're afraid of even going to another state in the country because they can't speak that language. So it's very important that in the school, it is not necessary that we must teach reading and writing because not everybody is going to go and read literature, but they can communicate by speaking. So 2 languages you learn properly, the alphabet, the writing and the reading part of it, but other 2, 3 languages everybody must learn just to speak. Maybe if you want to learn a foreign language, because today when I said this in Tamil Nadu, they were asking, but where to get a French teacher, where to get a Sanskrit teacher, where to get the Bengali teacher? I said, you don't need any teacher because everything is on the net. Somebody will teach you directly, it's all there. You can learn how to speak, and you must make sure at least a few hours in a week or 1 or 2 hours in a week you speak in Bengali, you speak in Kannada, you speak in Gujarati. This will make us a more integrated nation and at the same time not losing our cultural roots. This is very important. As you said, unfortunately, it's become like this. English-speaking people are elite, non-English-speaking people are kacha people, you know It's unfortunately become like this. Because of that, probably because of that, since… I would say since 1950, there has not been any great amount of local language literature coming. The literature that is coming out largely I may be wrong, in some languages it might have come out. In southern India, the way I look at it, I think Malayalam has produced some amount of literature even in recent times. Kannada has done some. Rest of it is all very activist kind of literature, always against somebody, always deriding something, always attacking something else in the form of literature. This must go literature. It should be a profound exploration of both language and ideas in so many different ways. Everybody is free to write what they want. I'm not saying they should not criticize or write about something, but right now only that kind of literature is coming. So, the segment that reads it is a very small segment with negative intentions towards some group or something else, they read like that. So, if this does not change, bringing back local languages in an active way is like raising the dead, you shouldn't do that. It is very important, right now we must do it because still most of the languages that we have, of the 700 and odd languages we are supposed to have, out of that, only about 600 they are saying are dying. At least these 24 or 25 languages which are officially recognized, these languages should be kept as living languages, not preserved languages. Not preserved in an archival fashion, but they must be living. For it to be living, even if I don't write in Bengali, I should be able to speak, or at least if I hear, I must be able to understand. That much exposure if every child is given, I think national integration also will happen very well. Language nourishment also will happen. They will become living languages rather than trying to preserve them.
I totally agree with you, Sadhguru. This is a very, very important issue and very dear to my heart. I've written about it many times. But I think, as you say, this activist control over literature, and of course, then the whole system of award giving to each other, which sort of creates this whole image that this is the only kind of literature that exists, is actually been very damaging to our languages. So thank you for bringing that point up. Now, I'm going to move to another somewhat different point, which is, of course, important to both primary and secondary education, and that is that of imparting values, human values, civilizational values. Of course, Swami Vivekananda used to talk about man-making in the language, in the 19th century terminology. Now,
Hey, you can't be quoting only Bengali people, huh?
Well, since I was told about mother tongue being the driving force, I should have to quote Swamiji. Although having said that, I think
Already you mentioned two Bengalis, Tagore and Vivekananda.
that is true. That is true. So you yourself have been experimenting with some of these using your Triveni system of education. Can you tell us a little bit about how you impart education? What are its sort of value anchors, so to speak?
See, right now we have three streams of education or three different types of schools. One is rural schools. These are mainly oriented towards getting children out of the economic and social pit in which they are. Both economically and socially, they're in a pit out of which they cannot get out unless they have a qualification which will take them out of the village in some way. So these schools are designed for this. This starts with local language and English language in the first standard itself. In the first standard itself, computer usage starts. Most of them are able to use computers very effectively by the time 8, 9 years of age, village children. At least 47% of the children today in our school are first generation going to school. That means their parents have not been to school. But they speak fluent English within 2 years' time, they're able to handle computers effectively in 2 to 3 years' time. This is a passport to get out of the village, find employment anywhere in the world and go. So we are also putting a different kind of spirit, teaching yoga, sport, activity, variety of things. Theatre is a very important part for children to learn to express themselves and come out and speak boldly. This is one thing that I feel is lacking in Indian people. They're intellectually very smart, but they're capable of grasping many things very quickly compared to a whole lot of populations in the world, but they don't have style of presentation. I see here in United States, just outside one big building, one guy is standing there as a security or whatever, one Mexican guy, he can't speak one word of English, nothing, but he stands there in full style. That is missing because we've probably being an occupied nation for nearly 250, 300 years, we've become little like that. We cannot even stand up like this, standing like this. That's changing in this generation big time. It is… see, it comes from a certain tradition where you don't want to aggrandize yourself, you want to be like this, it's a wonderful thing. But today in the world, it is important that you present yourself properly. Presentation, in United States, packaging industry is bigger than the products industry, you know because presentation is very important. So that also we are grooming the children so that when they go out, they present themselves well, they speak English language, because without English language, people are made to feel like they're stupid in our own country. You speak just your own language, you don't know this, it looks like you're an ignorant person. That level of discrimination has come, we are trying to change that so that you both in your mother tongue and in your English language, you're reasonably good by the time you come out of 12th standard. That is the rural schools called Isha Vidya. The second is called the Isha Home School. This is a very high, intensive kind of investment and infrastructure school, where for every 4.5 children, we have one adult monitoring them, because here there are no punishments, there's no scolding, everything is done by nurture, and it's a 7-day school, it's a residential school. It is 20 children staying with responsible parents, two parents who, like mentor them for 4 years, and then they hand over to the next home and the next home. So most of the education happens at home, except for labs, playground and library. Mostly they learn everything within this large household where the atmosphere is very friendly, home-like. This is a school where when vacations come, when they have to go home, children are crying, they don't want to go home. This is probably the only school like this. So that is Isha Home School, but we have another school, Isha Samskriti, which comes under a different category of schools, where the academics are very, very minimal in terms of mathematics and a little bit of science and accounting and that kind of stuff, but largely they learn yoga, Sanskrit language, classical dance, classical music, and Kalaripaitu, which is the martial arts from the south. So these children are growing in a completely different way. These are the most amazing, you must see them, because this is totally focused towards developing human body and brain to the fullest without any intention per se, because that is when a human being can really perform well, and they are all shaping up to be really wonderful children, and they're getting into various aspects of life. But this Triveni that you mentioned is about liberalizing the existing schools, because a new policy came and we also wrote one education policy kind of thing, recommendation. The important thing is to understand India is not just one populace. There are many levels of India. The same thing cannot be catered to all the people. So either you have to pull down people who have made it, they will all escape from the country, or you have to raise all the people to that level. That is a onerous task which we are trying, but it's a huge population. There are different levels of poverty, different levels of health, different levels of nourishment. You can't
Also
push
different
all of
choices.
them. Hmm?
Also different choices. I mean, different people, different children have different proclivities, parents have different aspirations. Even if they came from the same economic strata, they may want to do different things.
That is also true. That is the next level of thing, that people have a choice. But I'm talking about those levels of population, we don't really have a choice. So you cannot think of one education system that'll cater to all. All that'll happen is, nobody will want to go to schools in India. If they can send their children first standard itself to some other country, they will start sending them. Right now, they're still sending them for, pre-graduate classes itself. After 10th standard, they're sending… There was a time, like probably when you were growing up, children went out for masters to United States and UK. Then they started going for grad school itself to US and this thing. Now everybody is going out for the 11th and 12th standard itself outside. This is
Okay,
happening in a…
let us plan for kindergarten as well.
That will happen if we don't drastically change this. So policies and policies we can change. There are many points in the new education policy that I appreciate, but I don't believe we can do a large-scale implementation of that. For example, only half the time we want to halve the curriculum. If you take away half the curriculum, where is the staff to do those creative things of sport, art, music, theatre? Where is that staff? How long will you take to train that staff? Is it even possible? I'm saying…
This brings us to a somewhat different issue which is related, which is about the role of standardized exams, both internal assessment and then board exam for standardized assessment at some age, maybe at class 12 or something. Now, I know nobody likes board exams, and there are many arguments against it. There are also arguments against doing exams through the system. However, there is a need for some screening. Otherwise, what is the basis on which a large system can be maintained? So there is, in the new education policy, there is a sort of sense that, exams will be de-emphasized, which, I mean, all in favor of it. But then how do we do the screening? How do we ensure that certain levels are attained? How do we ensure how do you do admissions into colleges, for example? All you will do is you will introduce yet another exam of some sort, NEET or whatever, or IIT exams, in order to have to join these institutions. So point of the matter is we have to be very careful. These exams were introduced for a certain purpose. And while it is good to say that we should, judge people by other things other than exams, which I agree with, but to simply throw the baby out with the bathwater, maybe
No, that won't work at all. See, I'm not even… though personally I never wanted to go to school, I went there only when it was absolutely necessary. In spite of that, I believe without the schooling system, there will be chaos. Right now, for the kind of population we have, the kind of outside facilities we have, there are not too many opportunities. If they don't go to the school, they will just miss out on a whole lot of things. So it's important children go to school, but what do they do there? How can we transform this? I don't believe you can just transform. It is a very good thing that they're saying less curriculum and more other activity. But how do you bring about that activity in some few 100,000 government schools across the country? That's not going to happen overnight. By the time you implement, it'll be minimum 10 to 15 years' time. By the time that time, a whole lot of things will be redundant. One thing we need to understand is, India has a rich tradition of arts and crafts and various other things that we can do. They're all in the process of decline, means they're almost… if you neglect them for another 25 years, most of them will be dead. Right now, they are at a place where if you don't pump in some oxygen, they will die. So this is the time to allow this compulsory education system right now makes it this way. Suppose you are a carpenter and your son wants to come and work with you. Well, we can book you for child labor. So, if you're a farmer, you take your son or daughter to the farmland to work with you, then you could be booked for child labor according to the law. It could be easily exploited like that. It has happened in some cases. So now the important thing is, one thing we should relax is, if the child is working with the parent or within the concerned community, they must be allowed to work, because after all they will go to work somewhere, isn't it, later on? Now, only thing we have to ensure is his basic literacy. Literacy does not mean you can just write your name or something. Literacy, we must set a higher standard of literacy, that they must know this much of mathematics, this much of accounting, this much of banking, this much of history about this country, this much of civic, operations in the country, how the country works, what is an election system. To that extent, everybody must have literacy. So there must be some level of physical development programs, sport and these kind of things. Along with that, 3 to 4 hours a day, if he goes to the farm, if he or she goes to the farm or to the workshop where his father or mother is working, there is nothing wrong, because traditional arts and crafts and skills must transmit to the next generation. Otherwise, it'll be completely lost. Right now, which you mentioned vaguely, is in most schools, especially in Tamil Nadu, and I think it's across the board all over the country, is till ninth standard, there is no failing a student. Nobody fails. They are passed. This is a compassionate way of doing things. This was done to ensure there are no dropouts, because if you fail him, then the parents think this fellow is useless and they'll put him to cattle grazing or something else. So they pass everybody up to ninth standard in the government schools, especially in the rural schools. Now you have millions of young boys and girls, especially boys, who have reached 15 years of age. They cannot add 2 plus 2, they don't know anything about education, but they have the attitude of the educated. They cannot go to the farm and work with their parents, they cannot go to their father's workshop and work with whatever skills they are doing, because they are neither physically capable nor mentally capable for that. So this is a hotbed for crime, militancy, variety of things. If you leave youth without skills, without competence to earn their own living, naturally you have a ticking time bomb going. So one thing we have to do is that traditional arts which are there, especially weaving, it's the second largest employer in the country. But this is not something that you can learn after you finished education, you go and sit on the, the the weaving process and try to do it. It's not going to work. You cannot work the loom after you're of a certain age. You have to get this in your head from a very early age. So why is it that we are trying to destroy everything and reinvent everything? This is not the way to go about it. This is just continuation of what the British did. They did it for their purpose successfully. We should do for building our nation what is needed. One important thing is the traditional skills, arts, crafts must be revived, because as the world moves where it is moving, all these handmade things will become immensely valuable in the next few years. As economies develop across the world, people are more and more looking for handcrafted things, something that human beings have created, not just machine-made stuff. So that movement is already beginning to happen in the elite. It will also come to the rest. Once the cost of production comes down, it will come everywhere else. But this we are completely destroying with this compulsory system of education. So this Triveni system is about dividing these different needs of the people so that everybody grows according to their skills and aptitude and economic capabilities. At the same time, there is room to transpire between each one of them, that they are not segregated based on their skills or their lack of skills. They have the opportunity. Somebody may show immense possibility at the age of 15. Somebody may not be so, they may show possibility at 30. Somebody may show it much later. That room should be there. I think that room now the new education policy is trying to create. You can discontinue education and again go back to school whenever you wish. That is a very, very positive thing, which is there in every country, but now it is coming into India. That's a very good thing.
So I think that's absolutely right, and in fact that leads me enough to somewhat to the next question I had, which is about lifelong learning, and of course this is there in the new education policy, but I think we need to see it also in another perspective, which is the following. You see, we are all living now routinely into our 80s. Most people on this planet, and even in India, if you discount what is still fairly high infant mortality, once you cross a certain age, even the poor are now living into their 70s on a routine basis. Now, this means something quite important. First of all, we know that no pension system in the world is going to survive this longevity. So everywhere in the world, especially now that governments around the world are as indebted as they are, we are now going back to a world where basically most of us will be working well past 60 and retirement age. And that is what it should
I'm
be.
still working, huh?
Absolutely. So that is how everybody should be. In fact, this idea that, people retire at 60 and go and play golf, well, it was an aspiration when most people lived till 60, and, being able to play golf after 60 was an aspiration. Now, when everybody lives past 60, and how much golf can you play for the next 20 years? So point of the matter here is that I think what will happen is that we'll first of all work till our 70s. This is going to be quite routine, not a bad thing because we'll be all physically capable of doing it as well. However, there is a problem here that our education system is set up that we get educated till somewhere in our early 20s. And then essentially nobody goes back to being retrained except for in a few technical fields. Maybe if you're a doctor or something, you have to go back to learn new skills. But even there, many people don't. So now what happens is that essentially you have a 50-year working life and you never get reskilled. In fact, the real danger is that many of the people who are in the most senior-most positions, maybe in their 60s, will be the ones which are the furthest away from education, are the most outdated consequently. So you'll have a situation where the most outdated people in the system are taking the most important decisions.
Not only not learning, refusing to learn.
Refusing to learn. So now what do we do in this environment? Now, the new education policy does talk about lifelong learning, especially if you're having a 50-year, work life. Then it's possible to work for 20, 25 years, go back to university and come back and have a full new career. So in that environment, how do you think we should restructure the way schools are set up? So it's all very good to say that, okay, we now allow you to go back to school, but that's not how life is set up. For example, we set up universities far away from cities. Now, if you are already married, have children, you already have a career, it's not possible to take 4 years off to go to IIT Kharagpur to do another degree. How do we now rethink this given the technologies that are available, given the way the world now will work?
See, these attempts have been there in the form of open schooling and open universities, postal graduations, but they've always been seen as second-class or third-class education compared to the real education. You have to upgrade them in such a way that it's possible for you. Let's say you want an engineering degree and you're not an engineer and you're 45 years of age. Well, you should be able to study maybe the 5-year course you can study in 7 years because also you're doing some job. But you go back for practical things, let's say 2 months in a year or 3 months in a year, because most students who go to college don't study for 3 months in a year, I know that. Okay, they largely live there in so many different ways.
Mostly they photocopy the notes 3 weeks before the exam and study it, as you pointed out.
So, 3 months they have some practical sessions and understanding, but they learn everything else online and go there, and maybe monthly assessments they can do online. Very easily you can set this up and you don't even need teachers to do that. Artificial intelligence can correct what they are doing and this. So, only thing is, from memory to attention, it will shift, which is a significant shift. Right now, the biggest mistake we have made in our education system is, we are mistaking or misunderstanding memory as intelligence. If I can read 10 pages of a textbook and vomit it in my examination hall, then I'm considered brilliant. So, do not misunderstand memory as intelligence. And memory was important when there were no recording devices, when there was no written book. Everything people learned by memory, and the guy who could recite things just like that was considered brilliant. Not anymore, because your phone carries 10 times memory of what you can carry in your head. When this is the case with us, there is no need to continue with this thing of testing somebody's memory. You have to test somebody's ability to be attentive. There are ways to do that. And even if he copies the answer from elsewhere and puts it, it must be written in his language and his thing. That means he has a better understanding of the subject rather than just repeating what is in the textbook. What is in the textbook, if it is textbooks are made simply technically correct, no literature pieces in the textbook. Most science textbooks in India are like literature. If they're just point by point, formula, this, that, whatever, you understand and you write the story. If that much attention and understanding is there, he will pass the examination. Even if he is looking at the textbook, still he has to write it, all right? If that happens, we will shift the education from memory to attention. Once attention comes in, then intelligence will play a role. not just intellect, which is again powered by memory. Deeper levels of intelligence will play a role in what we are doing, which is very, very essential if human beings from generation to generation, they have to show a significant improvement in our ability to live here, in our ability to live better, create better things, and above all, create a better civilization around ourselves. If this has to happen, human intelligence has to be fired. Right now, we are just pushing ourselves through education system with the power of memory. Right now, everybody is trying to take a cell phone into the examination hall, I believe. Because cell phone is considered as an appendage of your body, it is not a separate machine anymore.
So this brings us to since you raised the issue of memory, this sort of connects through to another point here, which is that many people have argued that our education system is in some ways too narrow. So, for example, we have humanities or science, and maybe by class 11 or 12, you have already got streamed into one of them, and that's all you study. Now, some attempts have been made over the years to try and widen things. And for example, this is being done at IIT Delhi. I know IIT Delhi also has an economics faculty, language faculty, and so on. And the students are being taught wider things, which is a good thing. But there are a few things we need to be careful about. First of all, for some reason, this only seems to be the case towards science and technology students being exposed to literature. What about literature students being exposed to statistics and mathematics?
No, we take literature so that we don't have to do anything, you don't bring that burden on us.
No, so this is actually a very important issue. Why do we let our liberal arts and humanities students off, as if it's somehow giving them a wider education is a bad thing?
No, definitely it's not a bad thing, but people choose humanities not because they're interested in education, because they're interested in just university life. That is why people choose humanities. It's clearly defined. When somebody joins for a certain subject, it means that he's going to have 3 years free, just going and coming. Science students have to slog, technology students have to slog, medical students have to slog, but humanities student means he's a stylish guy who goes and comes, all right?
This is a bit of a waste of human capacity in the same way, because we are enabling it in some fashion, aren't we, by doing this? I mean, if you go into this thing that, exams are, if we go to education by this whole attitude that it is a non-serious activity, board exams or standardized exams are bad, a certain class of students don't need to be burdened. I mean, I understand that we don't want heavy burden of everything onto primary school education, but surely higher education has to be a serious business.
See, I'm looking at it differently. Let's say today you have a university, let's say you have IIT, right now we are in that premises virtually. Right now, for example, I'm saying off the cuff, let us say you are catering to 1,000 students. I'm saying you can cater to 100,000 students or at least 50,000 students or maybe 25,000 students, if only you remove this classroom way of learning. If learning is largely done at home, you come to the university or to the school for let's say 2 days in a week, and these 2 days must be real works for you. If you have not worked for the remaining 5 days, this must be real works. And if you're not coming up to the grade in 1 semester, 2 semesters, you must be shunted out and you must again work your way back, you know. If this is done, the same facility can cater to probably 5 times, 10 times of the students who are there right now. This is a way forward, because in Delhi University, few years ago this joke was going on. People with 100% marks did not get entry. 100 out of 100, and they don't get entry in the Delhi University. What are you supposed to get? 110, is it? So
yes,
this
cutoffs have gone to somewhat absurd levels.
Yeah. So I'm saying the way to make use of essentially the problem is this: the infrastructure that you have and the population that's aspiring to make use of that infrastructure is disproportional. So one way of doing it is they use technology, they study at home, they come here and deliver on a weekly basis. They can come 1 or 2 days in a week, and that day must be like every week is an examination for him. If he is not studied, if he doesn't pass these 4 weeks in a row, if he fails, then he must go back to number one place and again start from the beginning, or he goes out because he may not be fit for academic process. Because whole lot of people are there for the wrong reasons, and that must go. And other forms of education, parallel forms of education should be available, of skill development and various other things actively available. This also can be largely run online if government wants to run it, or leave it to the private enterprise to run it online, skill development programs. There are too many controls and structures. I'm saying liberate the education completely. There is a substantial amount of government infrastructure from primary education to higher education, there's enough. I'm saying don't build anymore, leave it to the private enterprise to build. Well, it will cost. It is important that it costs, and that cost can be brought down by multiplying the number of people that you service, because mostly you study at home, you come to college only to deliver, only to find exposure, and you book your place in the library, you book your place in the laboratory to do a specific thing. Right now, I know from my school days, lab time is fun time, you do all kinds of crazy things and you think you're doing a great thing, all right? So you have to book your time in the laboratory because you want to experiment something. You have to book your time in the library because you want to read something there which is not available for you elsewhere. Or most of it you can make it available online so that they don't even have to go to that old type of library, they can just sit at home and read. So, we can make it like this, that one day you have to come for fitness and sport, one day you have to come to take weekly assessment tests going on. Rest of the time you study at home. If you do this, very easily you can service 5 times more students than you are servicing right now. This is the way forward, otherwise we will never build enough infrastructure for the population that we have for this generation. You may do it for next generation, but the important thing is to service this generation, isn't it?
So Sadhguru, we have come to the end of our time, so I will have…
Hey, don't say that, I have not come to the end of my time. We're just closing this conversation.
Yes, to the end of this conversation, not the end of our time overall. I agree with you. Hopefully not. But I thank you and IIT Delhi for this opportunity to have this absolutely fascinating conversation, and Professor Bolia as well for arranging this.
My best wishes and blessings to IIT Delhi. I hope every one of you benefit from this Naya Bharat movement, whatever that's happening. Unnat Bharat Abhiyan, may this be a success, because Unnat Bharat is the need of the hour. Definitely as a generation of people, we have the onerous task of moving ourselves from one dimension of operation to another on all levels of life, whether it is education or industry or economy, everything has to move. So this is a challenge for the generation that we are, but we should not balk under this, because this is our time on the planet. We must do the best we can, and we can, with all the empowerment that we have from technology and access like never before, like no other generation, we must make this the most wonderful time in the history of humanity, and we are capable of doing that. Let's make it happen.
Namaskar.
Namaskaram.
Okay, namaskar. What an insightful session this was. Thank you so much, Sadhguru and Sanjeev. Peppered with humor, as always, purified with thought-provoking criticism. An absolutely brilliant session. Thank you, Sadhguru, for giving us your precious time and wise words. If I had to summarize the conversation, I could essentially glean 3 main ideas from the conversation. You dwelt on the underlying issues. You talked about some ideas related to the conceptual framework about education and some approach on how those concepts can be executed. You also talked about some specific ideas. In the underlying issues, you exposed us to some really hard-hitting reality. It is an important feedback as a teacher for me, and a wake-up call for all of us. things about teachers reading notes in the class, education being repetitive, people perceiving as a waste of time. I think these are all important feedback, hard hitting indeed, but I hope we are able to learn from this. I completely agree that if you don't give something to the youth, there's a good chance that you'll have a hotbed of violence. I'm reminded of somebody who said, and I really liked it, that quite contrary to some other perceptions, youth are not really useless, but probably they are used less, right? Not useless, but useless. Completely agree. You talked about conceptual framework about education itself. You had some remarkable insights on the difference between memory and attention, and how there is a need for intelligence at various levels, in various layers, and how lifelong learning is an important component. How, if India has to really move forward, that is a key thing that we must all enable. In terms of approach, one good insight that I really liked was that we indeed have multiple layers and levels of society, all of whom have different needs. They have different privileges, different levels of access, their interests might be different, their aptitudes might be very different, and so on. So indeed, to cater to this different layers and levels, we do need a different approach. A one size fits all is definitely not going to do. And I do see NEP taking some significant steps towards enabling that. Further, I think in a country as diverse as ours, and we are diverse, we have a long history, a large geography, humongous and large population. Not everything certainly will happen by policy. I think more and more the government also seems to be recognizing that. Community has a very important role to play here, in many other things, of course, but definitely in education. Not just by building schools and not just by taking those other interventions, but even in places where government schools themselves run, community can play quite an important role. We are trying some of these experiments in our own Unnat Bharat Abhiyan cluster in Vrindavan, and it has seen some meaningful results. I really like the specific ideas that you talked about. One specific thing that I'd like to really highlight is how the Isha home school really gives that homely environment, and that one set of parents who really closely mentor the children that are associated with them. Reminds me of the idea of a Gurukul, when it was essentially the Guru's school, the Guru's family, the entire set of students that are there. I think a very important idea. If possible, I think quite a few of us can learn. We can indeed play that role as well. Maybe not everybody needs to go in schools which have large classrooms. Maybe some of us can actually learn from such environment as well, and some of us actually can indeed play the role of facilitating that learning, right? I really liked. I think there are a lot of things that one can learn from that. I absolutely loved when you talked about the skills and arts and the need to promote them. And I particularly liked it when you mentioned that it is not just to preserve or save them. Actually, these arts and skills can become our saviors. They can prove quite valuable in our own sustainability as well as livelihood, apart from, of course, raising our own levels of consciousness. This is the first time I'm hearing of this idea of speaking languages. I think, of course, all of us do that all the time, but actually inculcating that, incorporating that in our education, I think, one can definitely do that. It can be with English, with any other language, Indian languages, right? Non-Indian languages, and to my mind, at least, focusing more on Indian languages. But yes, the idea of speaking languages. It is well known that kids are capable of learning multiple languages at that age, and this thing can be quite useful actually, learning languages, not just for the sake of learning languages, but also in terms of developing their logic. I'd like to add one thing about to this entire set of ideas that you talked about, Sadhguru, which is coming essentially from my own experience as a teacher for the last 10 odd years at IIT Delhi. At the end of every class, I'm able to figure out how good the class was, how good the level of learning was for both for me as well as the students. Interestingly, I've been privileged to, teach, this set of students for the last 10 years, where probably I end up learning more in a class actually than the students probably learn. And, when I've been reflecting on it, one thing that I've realized is, the days when I'm the most empathetic are the best days. I think empathy is key. If I have to really explain a concept, I need to understand and get into the mind of my class. It is also important to sort of make them comfortable, to really understand where they're coming from. If it's an early morning class, appreciating that there might be some, long nights, whatever, they might have come from a certain context. And that has to be really kept in mind before you actually go on and begin your teaching. And even when you do the teaching. So I think empathy is the key word. The more empathetic a teacher is, I think, the more effective the teacher can be. And that really cannot be done technologically. There is no technology that can bring empathy. The role of teacher, I think, can never be taken by any technology. And I think that is what you also highlighted. Of course, technology can be a key aid and an important tool, but I think it is really up to the teachers to sort of bring in that environment where learning happens and, a lot of enjoyment happens as well. Thank you so much, both of you. And with these remarks and immense gratitude for Sadhguru, we conclude our inaugural ceremony and head towards the first webinar. And I'd like to begin by introducing you to the theme of the day. I believe the NEP 2020, the new education policy, indeed does take cognizance of several aspects that were highlighted in the inaugural. And a manifestation of that indeed is our theme today. I quote from our NEP. The purpose of the education system is to develop good human beings capable of rational thought and action, possessing compassion and empathy, courage and resilience, scientific temper and creative imagination, with sound ethical moorings and values. Clearly, quite clearly, quote ended, quite clearly a tall order. We want all sorts of attributes in our kids. And one can easily imagine how so many elements that are involved in delivering such quality education to indeed be able to do justice to the code that I just mentioned. However, I'd like to highlight, it is one thing to expect all of these things from children, but consider this from a child's viewpoint. I mean, language is clearly a key to communication and understanding in the classroom. Right? To put it very simply, and I will probably do an experiment in this webinar itself if time permits, but put it simply, a child should really learn in a language that she understands. Most developed countries and quote unquote advanced countries in the world, you think of Japan, think of Germany, think of France, think of Israel, you name it, all of those countries, they follow this idea to at least do some basic education in a language that kids understand, which happens to be the local or the mother tongue. It is absolutely essential to harness the potential of our population and help the kids realize their own promise. I think studies from around the world, there are enough of those that show that education, indeed in a language that kids understand, increases classroom participation, reduces the number of dropouts, and also the grade repetition. Therefore, I think the NEP's recommendations rightly states, and I quote, wherever possible, the medium of instruction until at least grade 5, but preferably till grade 8 and beyond, will be the home language, mother tongue, local language, or regional language. Now, my understanding of this is that this really doesn't mean one is fighting against English. I think there's absolutely no doubt in the minds of most people that matter that English is important. It's an enabler. It's a great tool to communicate with the world. And, and in fact, that's why this webinar is indeed in English. Right? However, I think in the interest of diversity, mining knowledge from all over the world, realizing the true and ultimate promise of humanity, I think other tongues for the world and mother tongue for every individual should be a very important consideration in how we deliver education. On this note, our theme for the first talk is education in mother tongue. And I now request Ruchika to take this webinar forward with the rest of the speakers.
Thank you, Professor Bolia, for introducing us to the theme of the day. To begin with the webinar, I would like to call upon Dr. Priyanka Kaushal to introduce Dr. Dheer Jhingran, our keynote speaker for today's special session. But before that, let me introduce you all to Dr. Priyanka Kaushal. Dr. Priyanka Kaushal is the National Co-Coordinator of the Unnat Bharat Abhiyan and a faculty member at IIT Delhi. She holds a PhD in Chemical Process Technology. Prior to commencing work at Center for Rural Development and Technology, IIT Delhi, Professor Kaushal had worked with TUVN, Institute of Sustainable Energy, Environment and Economics, University of Calgary, UNIDO, UNEP, etc. She is working in the domain of clean energy technologies for last 15 years. I now request Dr. Kaushal to kindly welcome our keynote speaker.
Thank
Thank you, Ruchika. Thank you very much. It's indeed my pleasure to introduce the next speaker today, Dr. Dheer Jingran. Dr. Dheer Jingran is the founder director of Language and Learning Foundation, LLF, an organization focused on improving literacy learning in public schools in India. He has worked in the primary education sector for over 3 decades within and outside the government. As an officer of the Indian Administrative Services, he was director in Ministry of HRD, now Ministry of Education, and Principal Secretary Education, Government of Assam. He has been advisor to UNICEF and Nepal's Ministry of Education. He has made a significant contribution to early grade reading programs and multilingual education in Asia, Africa, and India. Dr. Dheer has a PhD in education and has authored 3 books based on empirical research in education. Now I request Dr. Dheer Jingran to kindly address the audience today. Welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you so much for to Unnat Bharat Abhiyan, all the members, the organizers of this event, the Naya Bharat series and IIT Delhi, to give me this opportunity to talk about a subject that is really close to my heart and my professional work. And as Professor Bolia said, is now center stage after the new Education Policy 2020, which is including children's languages in the teaching and learning process in classrooms. All of us are hugely concerned about the fact that there is a learning crisis that is facing our education system. We all know through various surveys that more than 50% of our kids in the age group of 6 to 10 or 11 cannot even read a simple text and understand it fully. Now, my belief, based on a lot of research evidence across the world, is this, that including languages of comprehension, including languages that children can understand, can be a big game changer in addressing this learning crisis. So I want to begin my, my talk on that note, and I'll share a presentation now. Someone will have to enable my sharing.
Yes, Dr. Jingran, we're on it. Yeah, it'll happen soon.
Right. So, right. So basically, let's try and understand. I'll try and divide my talk into 3 parts, and what we'll do is that we'll try and have a question and answer in each section. In the first section, I would talk about how it's very important to have children's languages in the classroom, and why language education is so important. Language as a medium of learning, and children's languages are very crucial for that. In the second section, I will talk about what is multilingual education. We are not here to say that children should learn only in their language and not learn other languages well. The national language, the state language, English, they're all very important, and children should learn several languages well. So that's multilingual education. And in the third, I will talk about what are the different strategies that can be used to ensure that children begin through a language they understand well, and then acquire high proficiency in all the other languages and high academic achievement as well. So let me share my screen now.
Yes, sir, please.
Yeah. Yeah, is that visible?
Yes, sir. The PPT and video is visible.
Right. Okay. So mention that I'll talk about in 3 sections, and let me begin my first section, which is that it is very crucial to learn through a familiar language in primary school. And the points that I'm going to make here is this, that language is core to all learning in school, which is, of course, easy to understand. The way language is taught in primary schools today needs a thorough overhaul. the practices are inappropriate. And at the end, how children's home and familiar languages will help improve children's academic learning. I begin with this quote, which is a favorite of mine, that language is almost everything to education, especially early education. And when language is taught in school, it's not a subject that is being taught. Children are being taught the foundation of learning itself, how to learn. So language enables children to begin to learn. Any process that happens in school, whether it is talk or reading, writing, thinking, group work, all of that uses language. And on the right-hand side, you can see that language is absolutely crucial to all the higher order academic processes that happen in school learning, whether it's thinking, analysis, logical reasoning. So it's very important to build strong language and literacy skills beginning from the early grades. And these are not just basic communication skills, but what we call academic language skills. So it's very important because that is the medium for all learning. The new education policy does lay a lot of importance to basic language and literacy skills being acquired in grades 1 to 3 in all schools by all children. However, it doesn't get linked to the issue of how do you work with children's languages first. It's in a different chapter, the use of mother tongue instruction. It's very important to link foundational literacy and numeracy, which is a big target in the new education policy, with the use of languages that children can comprehend.
भारताच्या पूर्वेकडील देशात गेले. तुमच्या लक्षात थोडाफार तो आला असेल. आता आपण तो बातमी
Sorry, I think you could not hear the audio, but that's okay. I wanted to highlight how teaching and learning takes place in the classrooms today for language. Teacher talk dominates. So when we look at the percentage of time a teacher spends talking compared with children, often in classrooms it's 90:10. Choral repetition, so repeating after the teacher, as was happening in this video, you couldn't hear it, but there's choral repetition happening and copying work. In the name of writing, children are copying most of the time. Often children cannot even read, and they write. And this is actually a quote at the bottom from a research that I had done, where a teacher pointed me to a child who she said has the best handwriting in the class. And I discovered the child actually cannot even read. So he was just copying the symbols. So as you would see on the right-hand side of the top, teaching classrooms today is very demonstration and performance oriented. A teacher is speaking, a teacher is demonstrating something. It's more like a performance. And a textbook is used to teach language. While, as you can see on the right-hand side, language learning requires rich, natural use of language. A meaningful manner, communication-oriented style. That is the way language is learned and a language develops. Our classroom teaching is today very far from the way language teaching learning should happen. And this becomes even more complex when children are trying to learn a new, unfamiliar language. Coming to the third part of this section 1, As it is very crucial that children begin their early education through a home or a familiar language in early childhood education, as well as in the early school years. This seems quite obvious, but let me just here. First, of course, is supports higher order comprehension. The only way children can understand or comprehend, especially order, which involves thinking and reasoning, will be through a language that they understand well. And I just want to highlight two parts of this diagram. If you can see here that at the bottom, that reading comprehension, which is of course the most important skill that one learns, skills and ability that one learns at school, to be able to read a text and to be able to understand it at great depth, including inferential understanding also, is the product of language comprehension. So to be able to understand that language, oral language comprehension, and of course to be able to decode or to be able to decipher print, to be able to what we commonly say read. Now, if language comprehension is low, as it happens when a child is studying through the medium of an unfamiliar language, then reading comprehension will be very low, even if the child learns to decode well. So it's very important to develop strong oral comprehension of language in the initial years, which can happen through a language the child understands well. And then, of course, we have to build ability to understand other languages well to be able to build reading comprehension. The second, there's a lot of evidence around the world that using a home language as the medium of instruction improves learning and academic achievement in other subjects, not just in language, but even science and math in senior school. So, for example, here, several Indian studies have shown, for example, in Bodo and Assamese medium, that children who studied through a medium which was their strong language, their performance was higher. A very large study in Ethiopia has shown that children who've studied through their home language scored higher in science and math in secondary school. And the results were that if they studied for 8 years in that language, were higher compared with when they studied for 6 years in that language, the home language or the familiar language, compared with when they studied for only 4 years. So that's very clearly that achievement in other subjects is higher when you study through a medium that you understand. In the US, there have been large studies in the late 90s that show that if you look towards the top of the graph, where it's 51, 52 at the end, 61, 52, and these are models where two languages are used, a language very familiar to the child and a language that is unfamiliar and the child is learning, a bilingual model. You can see that learning achievements are much higher. The learning achievements in the brown line at the bottom are the lowest, where children are studying through a medium of instruction, which is a language that they do not understand. So there's enough evidence, a lot of evidence across the world to show that a medium of instruction that children should be a language that children understand. There is also a lot of evidence, and we'll talk about it a little later, that if we start with a language that children know and are familiar with, their strong language, then that helps to learn other languages better, which is our objective. They should learn English well. They should learn the state language well. So that is very useful. Another important point is that using a language that children are familiar with helps create a positive self-image among children in class, a confidence. And there have been so many studies to show that if children are emotionally adjusted and they, in the classroom, they feel confident, then they learn better. And that can happen if children's languages and cultures find place in the classroom. And of course, this sounds obvious, but classrooms will become much more child-centered. Children will be very actively engaged if their language was used in the classroom. I have a video. I'm not sure, again, this may not Sound may not be there, but just please look at the way children are interacting with the teacher. The teacher is using a mix of children's language and Hindi. This is a classroom in Chhattisgarh where children come from a different language background. The teacher is using a mix of language. The children are responding in whatever language they're comfortable with. Some children are responding in a mix of language, Chhattisgarhi, Hindi. Some are responding only in the local language. But the classroom is so vibrant because their home language has been brought in there.
तो तौरे पर आते तौरे पर आते हैं नावा में जात रहो तौरे पर नहीं आई तो किसे करी देखता था वो फुगा वाला रहता है ट्यूब सर उसमें उछल जाएंगे ये सब अब मान लो ट्यूब भी नहीं होई था किसे लकड़ी को नहीं बताते सर लकड़ी पे बैठेंगे तो ऐसे करेंगे तो जाएंगे लकड़ी लाओ उसको बांध दो और चलते चलो ये लकड़ी नहीं में दुखेगा भागेगा क्या
So in this classroom, we find that the teachers engaging children in higher order questions, questions about why did this happen? What is your opinion about this? And all that was possible because a use of mixed language was being done. I'll stop here for my first section. And if there are any questions, I'd like to take them now.
So, Dr. Jingra, before we begin, I'd just like to say that it was all audible. Actually, the videos are perfect.
That's nice.
Quite good learning for me as well. The last video particularly. Thank you.
That's nice. Okay.
Hi, sir. We have a question from one of the participants.
Right.
Yeah.
Good evening, sir. My question is NEP 2020 advocating against the use of English as a medium of instruction? What is your recommendation about English medium schools from kindergarten or grade 1? How will children learn good English if they do not start learn it from very early on in school?
Shivam, I'd like you to hold on to your question for the next, because I am actually addressing this very, very directly in my section 3. But just to say, to answer your question here, I don't think the NEP says that children should not learn English. I think the indication definitely is this, that use a language that children understand, as a medium of instruction. It means that use English as a medium of instruction at a stage where children know enough of it to be able to learn through it. There's a difference between, just being able to understand a language and to be able to learn through a language. And I'll bring that out later. But to your question, yes, I think there is an indication that early use of English or an unfamiliar language as a medium of instruction is not the best for the child. Should I get to my section 2 if there's...
Yes, sir.
Yeah?
Yes, Dr. Jingra, yeah, let's move on. I think there'll be more questions towards the end as well.
Great, sure. So I said I've just divided it for convenience. The first one, we established that it's important to use children's languages in the classroom. I'll now try to address some of the questions that, for example, the one asked, what are some principles of learning language? What are some myths surrounding this? And end by saying that what we need to do is to introduce what's called multilingual education. Let's learn several languages well, including English. That's very important. So I'll address some of these myths about learning languages, some principles of language learning. Why is it important that we have multilingual education? And what are the essential elements of that? Obviously, we are a multilingual society. We all know that. We work through several languages in different domains, personal, at home, outside, at office, and education. So in a multilingual setting, obviously, we definitely need to learn several languages. We know that aspirations for English and other languages of economic power are high. We cannot neglect that. We also know that multilinguals are better. I don't have enough time to go into this evidence, but intellectually, cognitively, multilinguals have been shown to be superior to those who only operate in one language or monolinguals. Therefore, I'm arguing that it is mother tongue plus an important regional language plus English. That is what we should aim to do. And the education system can do this. Therefore, build a strong foundation of a language that children are familiar with, and then build on top of it language and literacy competencies in other languages. So we need multilingual education, not just mother tongue and not just English medium. It's very important to be looking at how we can do MT++, mother tongue plus plus. But what is multilingual education? I think there's so much confusion amongst educationists as well. Some people say it's for tribal children, but what happens to English? Okay, let's do some little bit of work with children's home language in grade 1 just for a couple of months, and then that's enough. So various things are talked about in the name of multilingual education. We'll see what it could be. I argue, as many other people who are who working with primary education, that multilingual education is for all. It's for all children, not just for tribal children who speak a very different language at home, but it's also for children who are today studying through English medium, and at school, they're not allowed to use other languages. So I'm arguing that multilingual education is the way a multilingual society like India must work through its education system. So it's not something which is confined to some people and some children. Let me come to some common misconceptions about language use in education. And it'll address something that Shivam asked as well. The first is a thought that the more time you spend on a particular language, the better it is for learning that language. Or the earlier you start the language, for example, start English in lower KG, in preschool. That earlier start to an unfamiliar language, children will learn better. That's not true, as we will see here. Also, this thought that children can pick up languages easily, and therefore let's do one thing: let's immerse them in an unfamiliar language from the very beginning. Let them learn through English or an unfamiliar language, and they'll learn to swim. Like if you throw a child into water, but actually what happens is that's in education, it's called a submersion approach that actually leads to failure and dropout. So that's the other myth. The fourth one here, which I will address again later, is that if you spend more time on one language, for example, if you spend time working with children in Hindi, then the space in the mind, in the brain of the child gets occupied by Hindi, and therefore, once you start filling the balloon of English, there's much less space available to fill an English balloon. Now, that is wrong. That's incorrect. So we'll talk about it. The last one is that an understanding that if a child learns to speak a language, for example, children pick up English, let's say, in a couple of years at school, and then they're ready, therefore, to be learning through it as a medium of instruction. That's not true. Because, as I said earlier, speak a language in a communicative, conversational manner is very different from learning through a language, which requires academic skills, which is thinking or reasoning or analysis, thinking through that language. That doesn't happen. So therefore, a lot of, I hear so much talk to say, well, why can't, and everyone gives the example of their own kids, in our settings. they learned English so well and they didn't have to learn through any other language. That case is different because they get a lot of support at home. But for the child who does not get an environment for English, even if she picks up in a couple of years conversational English, she's not ready to be taught through that language, which requires a very different set of abilities. So to that question which I had earlier, do languages occupy separate spaces in the brain like different balloons? No. This is proven through research and as well as theorizing. And without going into this too much, but the belief that languages develop totally separately, on the left-hand side, you can see as if two separate balloons of languages are being developed and grown, is incorrect. And languages have a strong common underlying proficiency. And therefore, developing one language also helps other languages. And that underlying proficiency grows as languages grow. And therefore, it is very important to realize that several languages can grow at the same time, not at the cost of one another. And just highlighting the same, this is called the dual iceberg model. I'm tempted to put a little bit of theory here because you're an academic audience. That's why. So basically saying that if a strong underlying proficiency of one language is developed first, it will really help in transferring some of these skills and abilities and concepts to another language that the child starts to pick up later. And the child will do equally well in that language because at one level, there is an underlying proficiency of different languages. And the last point that I want to make here is this, that it's not enough to say, let's do a bit of use of L1. When I say L1, this is the strong or the familiar or the home language of the child. L1. That's the common usage that we use. So this needs to be continued for some time because as I was distinguishing between conversational proficiency and academic learning proficiency, so the latter takes time to develop. That's why it's important to use a familiar language for longer duration. An unfamiliar language should be first taught as a subject, help children develop basic proficiency and some academic skills, and then use it as a medium of instruction. That's the principle there. And even when we have shifted to a different language as a medium of instruction, it's important to use the scaffolding, the support of children's strong languages as far as needed, primary school, middle school, for different concepts, for science where there are, concepts are difficult to explain and understand. Let's not hesitate to use children's languages at that time, even though the medium of instruction has shifted to English or another language. And if possible, keep adding languages without subtracting the home language. And in education terms, in multilingual education, we say that's a subtractive model where we remove a language and say, now that we are done with it, children can learn through other languages. It's important to keep that language alive in the classroom as a scaffold to help children continue to learn for higher order comprehension as and when needed. So that's very important. So as we discussed already, that children pick up languages, but they can't be used for teaching straight away till they've developed some strong academic competence there. Okay, to end this section, when I say multilingual education, I am basically saying that there is a need to develop a strong multilingual awareness in the teachers and system. You can see here about language hierarchies. Languages have different status, even though we are multilingual and we keep, we feel very happy about it. India is a multilingual society, but languages have different statuses, with English at the top and a tribal language, let's say, at the bottom. So it is important that in the system, education system, there is a feeling that these languages are inferior, children's home languages, and they are substandard and they cannot be used in the education system. So it's important to address this first, that language is something which is a means of expression and learning. Every language is adequate. If it hasn't been developed fully, it's because we haven't it. So it's important to develop an awareness that there are dominant languages, there are non-dominant languages, and all of them should find place, whatever is best for the child to learn. And then, as I said, number two is to focus on developing bilingual, multilingual competence, not just in their mother tongues, but also in other languages, including English. And when we include children's home languages, we should include them formally so that teachers are aware, they actually use it in a strategic manner, not just by translating, but in a strategic manner. Along with language, use children's culture and prior experiences in the classroom in the early grades, classes 1, 2, 3. It's very important for children's, as I said, self-image and self-efficacy. That was my section 2 about why multilingual education is important for India. I need guidance of whether I go on to section 3 or should we take a few questions here?
So we do have few questions.
Okay, so I will.
Hello, sir. My name is Himanshi, and my question to you is that India has more than 1600 mother tongues. So, is it possible to deliver early education in so many different languages or mother tongues? For instance, can tribal language be used for teaching in school?
Right. Himanshi, all of you are really bright and you go far ahead of where I am. And this is the topic of my next section. But let me say that any language can be used as a medium of instruction. Yes, that language, if it has never been used and has not been written, it needs to be developed a little bit. But any language is capable of being used for teaching. And to address your question very quickly, in Orissa, for example, there is a multilingual education program for the last 20 years almost, 15 years, sorry, which is using 16 languages in different schools, tribal languages as mediums of instruction. Yes, it is complex, it is an intensive process, but it is possible. I am not advocating right now that we should pick up 1600 mother tongues and use them as medium of instruction. That is my next section actually here. But we must be convinced that it is possible to learn through any language. And I think as Professor Bolia was saying, in the PISA, the international assessment that happens, the countries that do the best, Japan, South Korea, Estonia, Ireland, Finland, all of them, children actually take that PISA assessment, that test, in their own languages, not in English. So it is definitely possible. But yes, we have to decide what is best and appropriate.
Namaskar, sir. I am Shubham. And my question is, like Andhra Pradesh has decided to make English as the medium of instruction from grade 1. So will it not help children to learn good English and get better jobs?
Okay, sorry again to say this is definitely a question I'm addressing. And I definitely say that children should learn very good English, very, very important. But probably the best way to do that is not to start in grade 1. Starting in grade 1 could actually result in children not learning very good English because they don't have a foundation. That language is not around them. That language is not the language of comprehension for them. So while I'm with you that it's very important to learn English for employment, for empowerment, but the best way is not to start in grade 1 or even earlier, as people say, in lower KG and upper KG. There are strategies of doing this, which I will address very soon in the next section.
So I request Dr. Jingran, let's move to the next section.
Yeah. I'll take 10 minutes for the next section, and then we can have a few more questions after that. Right. And here I'm going to talk about practical approaches and strategies for a country like India to include children's languages. We saw in the last section that we have to include children's languages, but also ensure that children learn other languages well. And I'm going to talk very briefly about the language contexts in the country, which are very varied. What are the appropriate approaches and strategies in different contexts that can be used? So very practically, how can we bring in children's languages? The whole conundrum about English medium and some policy imperatives. Now, the census, of course, puts languages at about 120. The People's Linguistic Survey of India, I'm sorry, it's PLSI, counts 780 plus. Mother tongues over 2,000. Only 31 used as mediums of instruction. Just to say why the census lists only 122 languages. If you can see here, languages like Bhojpuri, Rajasthani, Chhattisgarhi, Magadhi, all with more than 10 million speakers, are all clubbed under Hindi. While actually, the intelligibility between Hindi and some of these languages may be quite low. So India has a large number of languages. It's very difficult to put a number to it, but definitely higher than what the census has did. And this is just from three parts of the country where my organization, the Language and Learning Foundation, works, just to say how complex and varied it is. In some places, you cannot even give a label to a language because that language has borrowed from several languages. It's not a pure language label that we can give. Even in, you see the middle one, which is Dungarpur in Rajasthan, we work with Wagadi speaking children, Adivasi community. They are learning through Hindi medium, but even Wagadi has got several variants or dialects. So they're quite different from each other and influenced by Gujarati, Hindi, Mewari, several other languages. I'm just trying to say that language situations are quite complex, and without understanding language situations, it is difficult to say what we should do. For example, in Chhindwara in Madhya Pradesh, today, Gondi speaking Adivasis have almost given up speaking in Godi in some areas. And they picked up and they speak the local variant of Hindi that is influenced by Marathi. It's not even the standard Hindi that we know. So it's important to know what children speak when they come to school to be able to then decide what strategies work best. And that brings me to the second part of my section 3, which is the approaches to multilingual education need to be different and designed based on what is the local situation. I'll not go into details about what it could be, but this is about what languages children speak, what is a language used as a medium of instruction. So a lot of things will decide what is the best approach to introducing children's languages. And I highlight here 3 possible approaches, and I'll run through that very quickly. The first one is what is more common concept of mother tongue based education, which basically means you start with the mother tongue of the child as the medium of instruction, whether it's a tribal language or it is Hindi or even Chhattisgarhi or Wagadi, and continue that for a few years. If you continue only for about 2 or 3 years, that's called early exit bilingual program, because you're exiting that language and then you're shifting totally to another language as the medium of instruction. A late exit would mean you continue with that language as the medium of instruction for 5, 6 grades, which is what the NEP is arguing for, at least until 5, if possible grade 8. While during this period you build the competence of the child in the second language or the language, say Hindi or English, which then the child is ready in 5 years' time to then study through that language. And even after that, L1, the child's home language, can continue as a subject. So that's mother tongue based multilingual education, which begins with the mother tongue as the medium of instruction for several years. That's the first model. And this is what is happening in Orissa today in about 1,600 schools in 16 languages. The second model, which is, as I said, easier to implement, can be done at much larger scale, is where, say, in Bihar or in, say, Jharkhand or in Rajasthan, Hindi would continue to be the medium of instruction, even from grade 1. But the children's language, say Wagadi or Magadhi or Chhattisgarhi, is used throughout primary school in a strategic manner. Not this, teacher wants to use it, can use it in some ways, but in a strategic manner, at least in the oral, to support learning and for higher order comprehension, while the child continues to learn the second language gradually, but the scaffold of the first language of the child is always present. This is something that we have tried out in a large number of schools, and it really helps children to learn. Again, the first model is, of course, the best, where you can have mother tongue as a medium of instruction for as long as possible, 5 years, 8 years. But where you cannot, then at least ensure that that language is available in the classroom in a very structured manner in the oral domain. The third one, and this is more complex. In India, typically, apart from urban areas like Delhi, even in many rural areas, you find that there are children with several languages in one classroom. There are, suppose, a Gondi speaking area, you've got some Gondi speaking children, some Chhattisgarhi or Halbi speaking children in the same classroom. Because of the mixed economy, you have children of different language backgrounds. And there it is complex because neither mother tongue based instruction will work. Which mother tongue? Sometimes there is a linked language, which is the language of communication in that area. In that area, people communicate with each other in a particular language. That may not be very familiar to young children because they don't go out of the house as much, 5-year-olds, but at least they have some exposure to that language. But elsewhere, we have to work with multiple languages for children in the classroom and help them learn, Hindi or English well. So broadly, 3 approaches to be followed based on a clear understanding of what is the situation in the classroom. And topic that's really of interest to a large number of people is English. NEP against English. Why not English? Is mother tongue against English? So it's very important to understand. At the beginning also, I said it's mother tongue plus plus, and English is very important as well. Now, a large number of schools in private schools use English as the medium of instruction from pre-primary stage. And as Shubham, I think, said that in Andhra Pradesh now, they've begun to use English in the government system. Many other states are starting some model schools for English, like a caste system. These are schools that are English. These are the aspirational schools. There'll be a merit test to get into that school, etc. The arguments that are used to say why English should be there are all wrong from a child's perspective. The government system and the government teachers are arguing for English medium or English to be brought in, English medium, because they're losing out enrollments to private schools. And that is the biggest argument that is pointed out, that we might have to shut down a large number of schools if we do not introduce English medium. That's one argument. And the other argument, which we have tackled already, is that to learn English well, it's best to start early, preschool, because that's the best way to learn English well and use it as a medium of instruction. But we have tackled this question and saying that starting early is not good, is not the best way. It's important to build a foundation, and then when the child understands languages, then a lot of further building of unfamiliar languages can be done. These languages will be learned much better if we start a little later with a strong foundation of a more familiar language. The third argument, which is even more complicated for us to address, is that, in urban areas and everywhere, all your middle class and so-called intelligentsia, their children are going to English medium schools. Why are we depriving children in remote rural areas and Adivasis from studying in English medium public schools. Now, I think my response to this is, yes, they have a right to learn and develop very good English, but the route to that probably is not to start learning through English in lower KG and upper KG. So, and very controversially, I raise this everywhere, an ideal approach to teaching to English in our schools is not to allow English as a medium of instruction until grade 3, I would argue grade 5, in all schools, because you cannot have a different rule for public schools, government schools, and private schools, because private schools sort of lead the way in terms of what others the government system looks towards. Informal and oral introduction of English can begin earlier, even at pre-primary or grade 1. That's fine. Let's make it a national mission to improve the teaching of English through a multilingual approach. Let's not say, like you saw in that poster, that keep your languages outside. This is going to be an English-only classroom. No, but improve the teaching of English, which is very poor right now because of teacher capacity, etc. Make it a mission that children learn good English. That's very important from grade 1, speaking at least initially. And then our target will be that children develop strong conversational skills initially, oral comprehension, and then very good literacy skills by grade 6 to 8. That is what I would argue for English as a country, for us, for all our kids to become very strong multilinguals. So finally, I end this with this slide. It's not about a mother tongue versus a dominant language, say Kannada or Tamil versus English. It's about using a familiar language and then moving towards a multilingual proficiency for all children in 2 or 3 languages, including English. So that's thank you so much for listening patiently. And if you have questions, I'm ready to.
Yes, sir, we do have a few more questions.
Yes, please.
Good evening, sir. My name is Astha, and my question is, social activists and organizations argue for the children to get English way of emancipation and catching up with the other communities. So, sir, what's your response on this?
Yes, I was trying to address this question to say, it is very important. English is not for the elite. English should be for everyone. But what is the best way for children to learn good English? A lot of research all over the world has shown that the best way to learn an unfamiliar language very well is to base that on a foundation of a language that which is the child's strong language, and then slowly build that proficiency and only then shift to it as English medium. So what I'm arguing is, let's improve our education system, improve the teaching of English, which is very poor in government schools right now, but not make English as a medium immediately, because the child needs to learn enough of a language to be able to learn through that language. That distinction I'm trying to make, you have to learn a language well to be able to learn through that language. So it is very important to start English early as a subject, good conversational speaking, communicative skills. Do that for several years. Once that competence is there, then if necessary, I mean, I would say only if necessary, you can shift to a medium of English. So I'm all in favor of everyone learning good English. I'm just saying the route to that is not via starting English in lower KG. A lot of private schools, a study that I have done myself, children actually do not learn good English. What happens in these private schools, as well as government schools, which are English mediums, A for apple, B for ball, because teachers themselves do not know communicative English. They do not, I'm not talking of the elite schools. So My argument is, let's get children to have very good conversational skills first, and then build on that for English medium and all children. Yes, definitely, including disadvantaged children.
Hello, sir. I am Mahendra Villa. For you, is how can our country prepare to get good results in international assessment like PISA?
Right. This is what everyone thinks about, and very important also. Uh, what is PISA about? PISA is about reading comprehension, right? Yeah. If you had a look at the test, it is about reading comprehension mainly in 15-year-olds, those who are in the age group of 15 years. Now, what is reading comprehension? As I showed on a slide, reading comprehension is language comprehension multiplied by strong, fluent decoding skills. Decoding is the ability to decipher print, read letters quickly, read words quickly. So it's very important that we build strong oral language comprehension in the language in which our children have to take the PISA test. It can be whichever language. It need not be English. PISA does not say that the test has to be taken in English. Whichever language the children want to take that in. So it's very important to build reading comprehension from the beginning. And reading comprehension, as I said, you require to build strong oral language comprehension skills. And how do you build oral language comprehension skills of the higher order? PISA is all about thinking and reasoning. You are given a paragraph, then you have to think and reason and answer multiple choice questions based on inference and analysis. To build those skills, you have to build strong oral higher order comprehension. This can be done best in a language that children understand well. It can be English, yes, but after children have picked up enough English proficiency, then we can do PISA in English as well. But the best thing is to build a lot of oral comprehension skills in a language that is familiar and the strong language of children.
So, Dr. Jingra, a couple of questions from my side actually before we conclude. So one question is, so this comes from my experience of interacting very closely with my absolutely wonderful students. They haven't raised it directly with me ever, but sometimes I wonder if this is a question that's going in their head, right? Which is, let's look at the word jolly, right? Now, people who start speaking English late in their life, and if they're from, let's say my own place, right, Rajasthan, they would call it joli, right? Because Hindi has a jo, right, and not a jaw, right? So
Right.
will people forever be stuck with joli and never be able to move to jolly if they don't learn it from the beginning? Will the accent play a role? Because that's a social pressure, right? It's a social stigma to not be able to jolly and be jolly instead.
Yes, you're right. Accent is best picked up in the early years. Young children are best placed to pick up the native accent. It's true, and jolly can probably never become jolly unless it's used very often, and there's conscious effort for many of the things. So it is a problem. The question I'm saying that we must introduce conversational English or whichever language we want early. That's called the sensitive window when children pick up language as well. That's ages 3 to 8. But that's not for teaching of languages. That sensitive window is for picking up what you're saying through natural exposure to language. You pick up a language, but for learning a language well, actually, I did not mention that argument. 3 to 8 is not the best age group to teach a language and to be able to learn a language through teaching and learning process. Older children learn much better. Adolescents learn it much better because their mind is then thinking about language. It's called metalinguistic awareness, but that is built when children are older. But as you said, native accents are best picked up by young children. So yes, that's useful. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know whether later in life, how important it is to just have a strong accent or also have very strong comprehension skills. But yes.
No, as an educationist, I completely agree with you. I'm just trying to put myself in their shoes and imagine. And the last question from my side, Dr. Jingra, before we move on to our next speaker, who's been very patiently waiting. So the ideas that you mentioned are brilliant. I'm actually fascinated by many things that you said, and I'll summarize that as well. But these are, I mean, the education process, it takes a good 10 years before you realize what the product is, right? I mean, you don't come to know immediately. So, and therefore, I think it becomes difficult for schools who appreciate this idea, the approach that you mentioned, whether Model 1 or Model 2, of introducing English in a certain way. And by that time, most of the parents, and pardon me for using this term, most of the parents and the society are already sold to a particular model. How do we deal with that situation? How do you prevent this enticement towards something that might actually be harmful in the long run?
Right. So first is to recognize that it is harmful for the child and harmful for comprehension, for real learning. If we care for just being able to decode and speak a few sentences, but if we really care for learning, then it is harmful to be starting through a language that is unknown to the child, unfamiliar. Now, it is important first for the education system and then for media and others to be convinced about this, that children must learn good English. And I keep repeating that. Can the education system tell the parents that children by grade 3 are going to be speaking and understanding and learning good English as far as oral communication skills are concerned? Because most parents actually care for that. But I think we have not been able to communicate that. And I agree that it's a communication challenge to say what's very important is children learn to speak English and understand English. And that can happen through good teaching of English without necessarily being using English as a medium. So there are ways of doing it. It's happened in some programs and projects, but I think it is a big communication challenge, and it is a challenge which, as a country, we have to take up, because if we care to do well in PISA, then we have to ensure that there is good comprehension, which can happen on a strong foundation of a familiar language. So, yeah.
No, wonderful. I think that makes complete sense, Dr. Jingra. And I think we would actually, keep engaging with you, subject to your time permitting, of course, to see how to take these ideas forward, including that of the communication bit that you just mentioned. I think it's important to sort of do something around that. Right. But I mean, I think we need to move to the next speaker, but I would really want to thank you. We did not really give you enough notice, and you agreed very kindly to sort of come here, spend all this time. And also all through the logistics, I think you were very kind to sort of give us time. Thank you so very much for all of that. Dr. Jingra, I've personally learned at least one thing apart from other things which I can directly use, which is in my classes at IIT, I of course translate here and there where I feel that there is a need and students may not get it. But I think this idea that you introduce of strategically using this, right? So, I mean, that got me thinking, and maybe I will think about what are some of those strategic points and ideas and overall framework which I should be using in my own teaching. So thanks a lot in a very personal way. But to sort of also summarize what I got from your session, because we'll make notes and take it to people, Dr. Jingran, is I think one point that you mentioned, which is amazing, is kids are also learning how to learn. I mean, we take it for granted as adults. I think that how to learn part is subtle, and at least the more educated ones among us should really try to understand that how to learn is a major question. I mean, it's not trivial, and that really is not possible unless you go by the model of mother tongue initially, at least. I'm fascinated by the kind of evidence that you showed, right? I mean, the usual evidence is that you do well, and Germany, France, Israel are doing well. But I think there is evidence in the form of the actual process itself as to what happens when you follow a certain process. And that was very, very good learning for all of us. This whole idea of having a positive self-image, I think nobody can agree with me, more than me on that. I think, in my own childhood, I've had situations where, self-image for me has been an issue. And I think unless you really, end this dichotomy between the formal world of a classroom and my own real world, which is out of the classroom, right? Unless we can sort of align that more, I think it'll be very difficult for us to get kids who are good and who are not just achievers but also good citizens overall, right? And I think that's absolutely brilliant. I think the other point that I really, would like to mention over and above what you mentioned here, Dr. Jingan, is I think there is a confusion sometimes, conflation of ideas, right? So government schools not getting kids is not only because of English or lack of English. I mean, there are a whole lot of other things also that
Sure.
are at play here. And I think we need to be working on that. The new education policy is a great step as far as the philosophy is concerned. And I think it can be done. If the American public schools can be the most sought after, and if India can have the best public universities, right? I mean, when you come to higher education, people usually think of government colleges as the best ones. I mean, why can't we do it, in our own way, in school education also? I'm sure we'll be able to do that. And we really look forward to engaging with you further, Dr. Jigran, on that. Thank you so very much once again.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
And that really leads us to the next speaker. Dr. Jingran, for the audience, he wonderfully described how the mother tongue plays such an important role in our education. Whole lot of ideas, needs, principles, theory, and I really appreciated that he got into a little bit of the theory. But I would like to now hand over the baton to somebody who heads an organization that probably is the epitome of the success of this principle. Mother tongue based instruction in the beginning. This school, for whatever it matters, is frequently ranked amongst the best in this country. I've been privileged to sort of have this benefit, in my own family in the form of my son. From pedagogy to philosophy, from illustrious alumni to ingenious students, the Vidyalaya, as the Sardar Patel Vidyalaya refers itself to, is an example from which perhaps all schools in the country can learn from. I'm privileged to introduce you all to Shri Anuradha Joshi ji, the principal of the Sardar Patel Vidyalaya and the speaker of our upcoming session. Anuradha ji has been awarded the National Award for Teachers by the President of India in 2016 in the special category. The Vidyalaya is the only private school in Delhi to have Hindi as a medium of instruction up to class 5. And I'd like to, inform all of you who don't know that this school, the Vidyalaya, sits right at the heart of Lutyens, Delhi, right? Anuradha ji calls it a wonderful barrage of Gandhian ideals, Tagore's creativity, and Sardar Patel's ability to plan. She's done her bachelor's in education and a master's degree in physics. What separates her from other educators is how she defines a role, and I closely relate to that role. In her words, it is not teaching at all. It is all about learning. It is about giving children a platform to express themselves and in the process experience the unbridled joy on their faces. I've had the pleasure of learning a lot from her in our interactions over the last 5+ years, and I hope all of you have a lot of takeaways for your own organizations and interventions from this session. Over to you, Anuradha ji.
Thank you, Professor Bolia. I hope I live up to those expectations. After such illustrious speakers before me, I've been rather nervous. Can I share? All right, she's switched it on. Give me half a minute while I just share my presentation.
Yes, please. Yeah.
Right. Sardar Patel Vidyalaya was established in a very newly independent India by Gujarat Education Society, who dreamt of gifting to the capital of India, Delhi, an exemplary institution where pupils learnt to be Indian first. The first principal of the school was Dr. Raghubhai Nayak, who set about bringing to fruition this dream of our education society. He served the institution for 14 years, and his other dream was adding to the first, which is to set up an institution worthy of the name of Sardar Patel. He was followed shortly after his 14 years by Vivaben Parthasarathy, who's been a legendary educationist and who added to these bouquet of programs that were introduced at the Vidyalaya by Dr. Raghubhai Nayak. From the very inception, one of the main points that was important for us at the Vidyalaya and highlighted by the speakers before me is that the Vidyalaya's early years of education is all in Hindi, which is for us the lingua franca, the most common language used in Delhi. Vivaben served the institution for a good 25 years. And in subsequent years, we, the following people, the people who followed her actually, have had the privilege of learning from her, as well as from the institution itself, and the honor of nurturing it to a place where knowledge and life coexist. I'd like to begin my presentation with a little something that we use as a motivational shlok for all our children in the morning. Our assemblies at the Vidyalaya are non-denominational, but we use 7 languages. We use Hindi primarily in the primary school, add to it English, add to it later in class 5, Sanskrit. By the 6th, the children have the option of adding one more language, which is either Gujarati, Bangla, Tamil, or Urdu. So that covers the 4 directions of India, hopefully. So the shlok goes, Kaam shuru karte nahi, bhay se meeche log. Madhyam tej ke beech mein, dekh fisham sahyog. I believe I'm also drawing inspiration from it today. Par uttam ve log jo har durgam path chhel, dridhta se बढ़ते सतत बाधाओं को ठेल. You know, for a lot of us, it is a badha to think beyond the norm of English as a medium of instruction in a good private school. But I'd have everybody know that we've always had Hindi. There was a time where it was up to class 8, where our learned people felt that 3 years of English was inadequate because at that point of time, India had the higher secondary education system and therefore it was rolled back to class 5. We've always believed that learning is a natural process. Many confuse learning with studying. When you study, you normally learn, but learning goes beyond studying in a structured or an unstructured environment. You can learn from all your experiences and ideas that allow you to grow. From what we encounter in the world, we learn. Research tells us that children are like sponges in the very early years, and they pick up most of these skills required for learning as well as learning in the very early years. So if they're comfortable, they pick up quickly. As Professor Jingran pointed out, for us, it's very important that children maintain that level of comfort when they come to school. So our teachers are called aunties, and as the little 3-year-olds walk into school, led up by the aunties, auntie being a loose translation of the word Mosi to make it more familiar, home and family-like. Auntie being a common name for everyone in India almost, that is not your mother, right? Till you achieve the status that I have of becoming a Mataji. So if you're comfortable, you explore your environment. For us, nursery begins at 8, the same time as everybody. Children join their aunties in class to have a couple of periods of play. Play is engaging. Play provides them joyful opportunities to explore. Play provides them with avenues on which to hook that curiosity and develop creativity. Auntie takes them down for lunch at about 10, And after a warm plate of lunch, they all come back to rest. So the environment of home is really transported to the environment at school to say you need to be comfortable, you need to be fine. Learning is not something that is alien, it'll happen naturally. So I have this little ditty there, which I just use to highlight what I mean by learning and studying. Ring a Ring of Roses, deliberately picked up because we're living in pandemic times. I'm sorry I don't have too many videos. I would have loved to shoot the day in school and film it to show it all to all of you. However, with children being away, I'm hampered that way. So many people think that learning and studying are similar, right? So here is an example of how I think they're different. Firstly, Ring a Ring of Roses, a pocket full of posies. If BBC's website is to be believed, comes from the 1665 plague, bubonic plague that plagued London. It was the Grand Plague of London. The posies being the red splotches that come on skins, and the posies were carried to hide the stench of the malodorous roses. A tissue, being the sneezing and the falling down, of course, we all know is dead. Right? A very popular nursery rhyme taught quite mindlessly at places, but taught. And there are many like that. I mean, Humpty Dumpty has its own angle to it and many, many more. However, I'm using an equally non-serious rhyme as an exponent of what I'm trying to point out is Hathi Raja kahan chale, soond hilakar kahan chale. Hathi is something that is very much in our environment. Halwa puri khao, we know that Hathi doesn't eat halwa puri, but fair enough, it is something that is in the child's environment. Ab Hathi kursi pe baithenge to ye sound zarur aayega. Right? Chatar patar, and kursi bhi tootegi. There is way more learning in Hathi Raja than there ever will be in Ring a Ring of Roses. If you're doing a Ring a Roses, you need to commit it to memory. If you're doing a Hathi Raja, it is a conversation starter for very many more things. To support what the previous speaker was speaking, these are results of a longitudinal study conducted on biliteracy by Dr. Geeta Oberoi, who is the founder president of ORCIDS, and by Ms. Catherine Snow of Howard School of Education, Ms. Sumati and Ms. Nandini Chatterjee of the School of Learning and Brain Studies. This was a study that was conducted in our school and has been conducted over a period of 3 to 4 years on acquisition of English when the medium of instruction for early years was Hindi. School 2 is a very well-known English medium school of the city, and I wouldn't like to name them, but School 1, the school in red, is for Hindi SPV is black for English and SPV Hindi is red. So you can see that whether it is English or it is Hindi, when the early years education is in a language which provides comfort to the children, gives them the ability to differentiate between whether they have remembered or learned, that's metacognition. Skills are developed, when their competencies are developed, you acquire the second language that much more easily. This is not a study from Ethiopia, this is not a study from anywhere else, but from within the Vidyalaya itself over a period of 4 years, and very recent. It's an ongoing study. I've taken the liberty of presenting that to you. Do children who have studied when the medium of instruction in early years was Hindi do well? later in life. These are just a few of the students of the school who've gone on to represent the country. Is the academic content or achievement at par with anywhere else in the world? That's for you to see. I'm only giving you facts and figures of how it is for us at the Vidyalaya. So, does early language learning or early schooling in the mother tongue help? My answer is most definitely yes. That's there in front of you. I'd like to draw your attention to one thing, please. This is not current. I couldn't put in too many slides, so this is the year 1979 onwards. And I have picked this up because I'm sure there are a few names there that you would recognize, who've made a mark for themselves on the Indian scene and some in the international scene. Tarani is a professor of social science, sociology at Oxford, at least was till he's changed. Vatsala is a known writer, and I think she's heading Hachette. And there are plenty more that you will find who either from academia or from government whose names are there in the list. With that, I come to the end of my presentation. If there are any questions, Professor Bolia, I'll be happy to answer.
Right, I'm sure there are questions. Do you want to moderate, Ruchika?
Yes, ma'am. There are a few questions.
Go ahead, please.
Hi, ma'am.
Hi.
I have a question. Could you please elaborate on your conviction behind insisting on early education in mother tongue, while most others emphasize on English only?
I thought I've just done that, Shubham, that if the early learning is in the mother tongue, the children benefit most because they learn how to learn, they learn how to express what they learn, they also gain most in terms of being able to pick up the second language well too.
Okay, any other questions from the YouTube channel, Ruchika?
Good
Yes,
evening,
sir.
ma'am.
We have, yeah.
Yeah.
I would like to ask one question from the YouTube chat box.
Yes?
That as you gave us the example of Hathi Raja and the Ringa Ringa Roses poem, so are there any more examples related to that part of your talk?
Oh, plenty. Plenty. If I was to pick up some ditties that we do at the school, say for example, it is the rains. काले बादल आरे बादल उमड़ घुमड़ के आरे बादल बिजली चमके बूंदें बरसे. That's another one for you. Then if you're talking about ditties that we teach, okay, then or nursery rhymes and songs that we teach, then chun chun karti aayi pakori, dekho halwai ne banai pakori. See, the idea of teaching a nursery rhyme is multifold. Teaching doesn't happen at one plane. There are always many events and many things that you can combine for children to explore. There must be something for everyone. For the musically inclined, fair enough, the idea of the notes going up and down. For all of them together, to listen together, to sing together, to create the harmony. But more than that, there has to be something that appeals to cognition. बादल बरस रहे हैं, बादल हैं, बारिश आती है जब काले बादल आते हैं, जब काले बादल आते हैं कभी कभी बूंदें गिरती हैं, मेंढक निकलता है. All that can be drawn in to any one of these examples. Now, if you're asking me about nursery rhymes like Ring of Roses, there's plenty more. There's Humpty Dumpty and plenty more. You're always happy to get back to you. These are the two that I can think of immediately. Humpty Dumpty was really a political rhyme. If you get onto the net, you'll find plenty more. Any other question, please?
Yes, good morning, ma'am.
Good
There is a
morning.
question.
It's evening now, I thought. Huh?
Sorry. Good
That's
evening,
okay.
ma'am. There is a question from YouTube.
Yes.
Since you teach in Hindi until primary school, have you faced challenges in attracting students from diverse backgrounds, privileged and underprivileged?
None at all. Let me make one thing clear, that while we do, the medium of instruction is Hindi, it's not that we don't teach English, right? English is taught informally in the very, very early years of nursery, but they do have English as a subject in class 1. And as the previous speaker said, as their command over English increases, subjects over a period of time gradually change from Hindi to English. So by class 4, we through the years use both languages while teaching maths. So while they write in English, by class 4, they have started doing a lot more math in English. For class 5, the science will shift to English in class 6. Mentoring does happen. Support does happen. For children who do not come from families where English is spoken at home, the elder students or the students of the senior classes in school will help and support them, as will the teachers, with support classes for English speaking starting from class 3 and hand-holding them to class 7 so that that transition happens more smoothly. 2, it's all right if you still don't pick up English. We have English support classes where children are given a differentiated paper till they are confident in the language. And even if they're not confident in the language till the 10th or the 11th, they're always welcome to switch to Hindi as their medium of giving the examination, although they know enough English. And all that is permissible within the system as it exists.
Okay. Anything else?
We have one more question from Astha.
Go ahead, please.
Namaste, ma'am.
Namaskar.
I have a question. Do parents even complain to you that the children are unable to speak fluently in English while their neighborhood kids do? How do you handle such situations, ma'am?
You know what? Learning needs to happen in a language in which you're comfortable. There's been enough about it today. That doesn't mean that I don't know English. Right? I could know English, but learning will shift to English only once the majority of the class is comfortable, which happens by class 6. So children do know English, they can speak English, and more often than not, we're usually complimented by being told that they speak better English than children from schools where English is the medium of instruction. So maybe that's peculiar to us, but that does happen so. So I have not had that complaint that you've brought up to say that, what happens and how does that happen? Because if a child is comfortable in English, you speak in English. If a child is comfortable in Hindi, you speak in English. But yes, the communication by the teacher in class will by and large be Hindi, gradually shifting to English. Let me also share something else. It is a fallacious argument to think that even English medium schools teach in English in the early years. You will find very often teachers will say, everybody sit down, bet jao. So that talk between the two languages is always there. Yes, in school we do like to encourage our children on one point, which is that if you are speaking in English, try and complete the sentence in English. If you're speaking in Hindi or you choose to speak in Hindi, try and complete that process of thought or sentence in Hindi, because that will have a huge effect on developing both English and developing Hindi.
Okay, great. So I think, so Ruchika, let me take over from here. So Anuradhaji, I mean, sometimes I wonder, if there indeed can be a school like this situated right in the heart of Lodi Estate and less than a kilometer maybe from Khan Market. But apparently surprises do happen, right? Things do happen. But before, I sort of conclude everything, just we do have questions on the practical difficulties, and you dwelt upon some of that, how you allow kids to still take exams in Hindi, etc., right? All of those things. And, hopefully we'll have the privilege of engaging with you separately on making a compendium of the steps that you take for the smooth transition. So I'll not ask that question here because I think we also need to finish on time, right? But I do hope we'll be able to do that. It will be very useful. But because, there are people who are from schools who are a part of the audience, I do have this one question, which is, and maybe you can, say it quickly, or maybe you can say, I'll get back to you with a detailed response, whichever way you prefer, right? Is, do you have any tips for schools who want to shift to such a model? Because many will have to, given the NEP, right? So what should their strategy be? What should be the first few things that they should do?
I don't think the shift will be such a problem, because a lot of the schools actually communicate in Hindi while considering themselves to be English medium schools. Carry on till that Hindi becomes more powerful. If you choose to teach in Hindi, but I'm sure the NEP talks about local language. So if you want to teach in Marathi, fair enough, why not? But the idea is that the language that is used at home for the first 3 years before a child comes to school, carry on in that language, because you are building upon the advantage of the first 3 years and not throwing that out of the window. You're not making a child uncomfortable. And let me tell you that, students of the Sardar Patel Vidyalaya are quite, as per them, the original Khan Market gang.
Okay, great. No, I completely understand and appreciate that. But like I said, Anuradhaji, we will engage maybe separately, depending on your time and everything, about the transition and compendium, right? But so let me then thank both the speakers. I think it flowed wonderfully, where Dr. Jingran talked about the principle and the theory, and it was great that you were drawing on from what he said, here and there. And I think it just says that you have really been an example of what he was trying to present in theory as a particular school. Wonderful. Our learnings today have really been that, well, you just have to do things that you're comfortable in, particularly in the early age. And that helps you not just in, learning whatever you're learning in terms of concepts. So, maths and science and such subjects. But even for learning English itself, it probably is better to start off with a language that you're more comfortable in the initial stages, at least. To my mind, I think that's a fascinating insight, for everybody who wants to, who cares about education. But on top of that, I think if there are any parents watching here or who might watch later, I think every parent, whether they want to send their kids to a school or not, whether they want their kids to become a scientist or, highly educated or not, there is a rising awareness, at least among what is called the middle class, that they want to have personality development of their kids, right? Quote unquote personality development. That's a big thing. And what I learned from your slides today is, even for personality development to happen effectively, I mean, the model of early education in English is, I think, important, if not critical, if not crucial. So wonderful. These are great learning for us. You shared little interventions and how the mother tongue sort of gels in with that, connects with that. I mean, that's very nice. I would like to also, I was talking to somebody, and I think this one other perspective that I got, right, very briefly, is this person says all of us are after our kids for concentration. Right? We want them to concentrate, right? And it's a very abstract concept, right? How do you make kids concentrate? And he gave a good, sort of, just a line, right? That, concentration ke liye connection chahiye. If you want kids to concentrate, you want them to connect to what you're saying. And if they don't even understand what you're saying, you can forget about all sorts of connections. So that's absolutely brilliant. I think, just to end all of this, in the teaching learning process, I think, to my mind, there are sort of two ends. The first end is that of delivery, and the second end is that of reception, which is the kids. I think children should be at the center when you talk about the reception, and which is what you've been trying to do. But to conclude this webinar, I'd like to say that at the delivery end, I think teacher really has to be at the center. All amount of technology and everything else can probably aid, but I mean, and they can facilitate and all of that. But I think teacher has to be at the heart of the delivery point. So thank you so very much, Anuradha ji and Dr. Jingran, for being with us today, sparing your very valuable time. You're an example in Sardar Patel of how one can do mother tongue, early education in mother tongue as a medium of instruction without compromising on either excellence or reputation or any other aspects of education delivery, because that seems to be a common sort of misconception among all schools. So as we come to an end, let me also talk about the next edition of this webinar. So we will move in that webinar from the heart of Lutyens, Delhi, to Kulavarti, which is a small place in the Nagar Kurnool district near Hyderabad in Telangana. And there is a fascinating organization there doing wonderful work on, guess what? I mean, something that not maybe SPV, Anuradha, but maybe many schools fear, many parents fear, which is math. They've developed a wonderful set of tools on how that can be done in a peer learning sort of a manner. And they've demonstrated it not just the theory, but also how kids can actually benefit. There are these little concepts about little teacher, little reader. Readers are leaders, and how math and peer learning can be combined with leadership and readership. So absolute gems. I would encourage all the readers to be hooked on and figure out when we are doing the next webinar, and I invite you all to sort of come there. Finally, the vote of thanks. I mean, of course, as I've been saying, this day can't end without a big thank you to Sadhguru Sanjeev, Dr. Jingran, and Anuradha ji for taking out their prestigious time. This event would simply have not been possible without the support of Unnat Bharat Abhiyan, specifically our national coordinator, Professor V.K. Vijay at IIT Delhi, and national co-coordinators, Professor Priyanka Kaushal and Professor Vivek Kumar. No amount of thanks can be enough for that. Big thanks to IIT Delhi administration for all this support, especially our director, who's always available to facilitate and encourage all kinds of education and research aspects. The subject experts group of UBA, Unnat Bharat Abhiyan, which is, one of which is the education one, which is organizing this webinar. We have a national subject expert advisory committee for guidance and coordination, and this is chaired by our former PSA, Principal Scientific Advisor, Dr. Chidambaram. I'd like to warmly thank him for his kind inputs in the subject expert group matters. A very special thanks to our organizing team who worked very hard to make this happen. To enable something with any reasonable implications, a large number of people contribute, from conceptualization to facilitation and execution. They're just too numerous to name, and many of them would also be attending this. And I'd like to profusely thank all of them. Last, but definitely not the least, I would like to thank everyone who has participated patiently in this webinar today. We went a little over time, but I hope this was all valuable for you. Please stay up to date and feel free to share your suggestions, questions, or queries on our social media handles. We are there on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, you name it, and it's all there. As we conclude our day, I just hope that the Naya Bharat series will help in inspiring and taking forward the love for our country and her people with the education vision that really uplifts us all. There was some crisis management when we started this event, and my family was absolutely helpful, from my 9-year-old son to my parents. It was amazing actually how things just work out. But it was a great day. I thank all of you once again, and I officially now declare the closure of this webinar and this ceremony. Thank you so much, everyone.